This past August, soybean fields across the American Midwest entered harvest season. Normally, this should have been the time farmers look forward to the most. But this year, the atmosphere felt unusually cold and quiet. The reason is simple. By this time in previous years, China had already signed contract for the next year's soybean purchases. But by mid-August this year, China hadn't bought a single shipment of U.S. soybeans. What's worse, according to a report from the American Soybean Association, nearly 7 million tons of soybeans are currently sitting in storage, piling up with nowhere to go. On the spot market, prices have already dropped to rock bottom. If these soybeans can't be sold soon, the end result may be that they rot in warehouses or even end up as food for rats. It's important to remember, China used to be the biggest buyer of U.S. soybeans. In 2024 alone, China purchased 22 million tons, accounting for 1/3 of total U.S. soybean exports. Now, many farmers in the Midwest are helplessly saying that this year's harvest has basically turned into a losing deal. So, how did things go from over 20 million tons of soybean orders to zero? And who has stepped in to replace the U.S. as China's soybean supplier? If you like our video content, please click to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can receive all our latest video content. Now, let's get into today's topic. This is McLean County, Illinois, in the American Midwest. As far as the eye can see, it's endless rolling farmland covered in green. This land is considered one of the largest soybean growing regions in the United States and has long held the record for the world's highest single-county soybean production. In 2024 alone, U.S. soybean exports reached $24.6 billion, accounting for 14% of the country's total agricultural exports. Almost every year, U.S. soybeans make up about 30% of the global market share, second only to Brazil. According to industry research, America's soybean industry contributes at least $40 billion a year to the overall economy and indirectly supports tens of thousands of jobs. These jobs are spread across farms, processing plants, trading companies, and transportation businesses, together forming a massive and well-developed industrial ecosystem. Globally, China has long been the biggest buyer of U.S. soybeans. Since the year 2000, China has purchased nearly half of all U.S. soybean exports almost every single year, maintaining a stable trade relationship for more than 2 decades. The reasons are clear. U.S. soybeans have many advantages. Their quality is consistent, with protein and oil content well suited for both animal feed and food processing. The supply chain is efficient, with smooth transport from farms to ports. Research and innovation are also advanced, ensuring both yield and quality. And perhaps most importantly, U.S. soybeans are harvested in the fall, perfectly filling the market gap after South America's spring harvest. All of these factors have kept U.S. soybeans attractive in the Chinese market. The numbers speak for themselves. In 2024, China bought 22 million tons of U.S. soybeans, worth as much as $12.6 billion. That single order accounted for more than half of America's total soybean exports. For U.S. farmers, China's huge demand is directly tied to their income and livelihoods, which is why so many of them hope to maintain a long-term, stable relationship with China. After all, losing the Chinese market would mean losing nearly half of the world's soybean trade. But no one expected that now. Chinese buyers have almost completely stopped purchasing U.S. soybeans. From what I know, around this time in previous years, Chinese buyers had usually already signed steady contracts with American farmers. Before the soybean harvest in October, China's purchases often made up about 14% of the entire year's total. But this year, the U.S. has received almost no new orders from China. In the first half of 2025, America's soybean exports to China were less than 3 million tons, the lowest level in nearly 20 years. Because of this, at least 30% of U.S. soybeans now have no buyers. That means roughly 500,000 soybean farmers are facing sharply reduced incomes from a year's worth of hard work, and some may even suffer outright losses. For many American farmers, soybeans are their main source of income, the key to repaying loans, covering land rents, and paying for farm supplies. If their cash flow breaks down, the next planting season will be directly affected. What makes things even trickier is the heavy burden of storage. With soybeans piling up unsold, U.S. farmers are being forced to shoulder extra costs for warehousing and management. And if the crops aren't stored properly, leading to a drop in quality, the losses could grow even larger. Against this backdrop, even Trump can't just sit still. After all, farmers are his key voting base, especially in agricultural states like North Dakota and Iowa. If exports stall and farmers' incomes shrink, the political fallout could easily translate into lost votes. In an effort to push Chinese buyers to increase soybean purchases, on August 10th, the U.S. president made a rare move by openly posting online, calling on China to quadruple its orders and promising fast service. But after this message was sent out, China stayed silent for 11 whole days before giving any response. As the situation grew more urgent, American Soybean Association Chairman Caleb Ragland wrote directly to the White House. In his letter, he pointed out that farmers' cash flow was on the verge of breaking down. The harvest season was approaching, soybean prices kept falling, and costs for fertilizer, diesel, equipment, and interest were all climbing. His tone was almost pleading, urging the Trump administration to quickly remove tariffs on China so that soybean purchases could resume. The association's report showed that nearly 7 million tons of soybeans are currently piling up in warehouses across the country, while spot market prices have already fallen to rock bottom. If these soybeans remain unsold, the likely outcome is that they will rot in storage, or even end up as food for rats. You might be wondering the same thing I did. Why has China been so reluctant to buy American soybeans this year? The real reason traces back to the tariff hammer wielded by Trump. Since taking office, he has repeatedly raised tariffs on goods from all over the world. And of course, China wasn't spared. In April this year, the U.S. raised tariffs on Chinese goods to as high as 145%, citing the so-called fentanyl issue. In response, China immediately added American soybeans to its tariff list. A 25% tariff wall instantly cut off the export channel for U.S. soybeans, wiping out their long-standing advantage of being high quality at a good price. By mid-May, the two sides held multiple rounds of talks to ease trade tensions and eventually reached a temporary agreement to suspend mutual tariffs for 90 days. During that period, soybean tariffs were lowered to 10%. But as we all know, such agreements are neither long-term nor stable. A 90-day buffer is nothing more than a temporary measure, and policy reversals could happen at any time. If Chinese buyers were to rush into placing large orders during this window, they would face massive losses if tariffs suddenly spiked again. Some people might ask, without China, why doesn't the U.S. just look for new buyers? The problem is global agricultural orders are usually set months in advance, so it's not realistic for the U.S. to suddenly find new large customers. More importantly, finding another buyer with the same huge scale and long-term stability as China is nearly impossible. Take Europe, for example. Because of dietary differences, demand for soy-based products there is very limited. Most European consumers are used to drinking milk rather than soy milk. The soybeans imported into Europe are mainly for livestock feed. But in the 2023 and 2024 market years, America's total soybean exports to the EU were less than 1/5 of what it sold to China. As for Australia, thanks to its abundant natural pastures, it relies heavily on self-sufficiency for animal feed. Its demand for U.S. soybeans is practically negligible, since the Western markets can't absorb America's surplus soybeans. Could they perhaps be sold to India instead? We all know that this year, the U.S. and India have been locked in a long standoff over tariffs. On top of India's continued purchases of Russian oil, The bigger sticking point is that India has consistently refused to open its agricultural and dairy markets to the U.S. Even though India has sped up its industrialization in recent years, at its core, it's still very much an agricultural country. Outside of the major cities, vast rural areas dominate, and most farmers work within family-based smallholder systems. Compare with the U.S.'s highly mechanized, large-scale agriculture, India's farm output is on a completely different scale. If cheap American soybeans were to flood the Indian market, they would deliver a heavy blow to the country's domestic agriculture. That's why the Modi government has been willing to clash head-on with the Trump administration, holding firm even under U.S. tariffs as high as 50% in order to protect its own agricultural and dairy sectors. In this context, India clearly isn't about to start importing American soybeans anytime soon. But recently, reports have emerged that across the Pacific, ships loaded with soybeans are leaving ports and heading straight for China. So what's really going on here? The truth is, ever since China cut back on buying U.S. soybeans, it has shifted its imports heavily toward Brazil. According to data from China's General Administration of Customs, in 2024, China imported about 105 million tons of soybeans in total, of which a staggering 74.65 million tons came from Brazil, a 6.7% increase year over year. Even more striking, China has already locked in its future orders for September and October of 2025, about 8 million tons in September and another 4 million tons in October. In other words, all the orders the U.S. lost have essentially been scooped up by Brazil. Why Brazil? The first reason is price. Take February 2025, for example. Brazilian soybeans were priced for export at $420 per ton, while U.S. soybeans cost as much as $451 per ton. That price gap alone was enough to sway Chinese buyers. But beyond price, China has already invested $20 billion in Brazil to build ports and railways, dramatically improving logistics efficiency. Today, the cost of shipping soybeans from Brazil to China is actually lower than shipping them from the U.S. Gulf Coast. And to win over the Chinese market, Brazil has rolled out a soybean to China initiative aiming to establish a full set of traceable, environmentally friendly, and compliant quality standards. According to the plan, a Chinese delegation will visit Brazil by the end of the year to carry out inspections and sign a bilateral certification agreement. This clearly shows that China is serious about switching suppliers and rebuilding an entirely new supply ecosystem. In addition to buying soybeans from Brazil, China also restarted its soybean import program from Argentina last month. The first batch, 30,000 tons, is about to arrive at Guangzhou port. The deal price for this shipment was roughly $360 per ton, while U.S. soybeans are selling at around $440 per ton. Although this initial order is relatively small, if large-scale purchases happen in the future, China could save billions of dollars every year. To win over the Chinese market, Argentine farmers have even spoken publicly to the media, saying, "No matter how much China needs, we can supply it, and we won't raise prices." This suggests that in the future, China and Argentina may see more and deeper trade cooperation. By contrast, the impact of America's unsold soybeans goes far beyond just short-term income losses. If the international market share continues to be taken over by Brazil, Argentina, and other South American countries, the U.S. soybean industry could end up losing China, the world's largest buyer, permanently. So, what do you think the U.S. needs to do to win back the Chinese market? To not miss out on our future projects and news updates, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We will continue to provide you with more exciting and interesting content.